I'm Gregor Thomson, I'm a philosopher and a writer, and I know what the meaning of life is. Welcome to The Struggle. This episode is brought to you by The Struggle newsletter. This is a weekly email newsletter in which I send out for free every Sunday a short article concerning the art of embracing struggle. If you feel restricted in life, if something is holding you back, perhaps it's time to struggle your way towards freedom. If you're trying to be productive, you're trying to be healthy and to achieve your dreams, perhaps you're chasing the wrong thing. A lot of us believe that we should be aiming for happiness, but this is an unwise pursuit as happiness comes and goes without any control from us. However, there is a way to be more fulfilled with life, and that is to embrace struggle, to exercise, to eat healthily, to have uncomfortable conversations, to take career risks, to discover who you are, and to be autonomous. That's the way to break free from whatever it is that's restricting you. And that's why I created a newsletter. Along with the article, I also provide tips, strategies, and recommendations such as movies, music, podcasts, and recipes to help along the way. To sign up for free, go to gregorthomson.com. The link will be in the show notes. Confirm your subscription and make sure you check your spam folder for your welcome newsletter and add me to your contacts to continue to receive it in your inbox every week for free. And that's it. You're on your way to struggling more and being more productive, healthy, and motivated. Now, let's get on with the struggle. This is episode 38 of The Struggle with me, Gregor Thomson, and this is a special one, as it's the second ever guest episode of The Struggle podcast. My guest today is Oliver Burkeman. He is an author and journalist, and he wrote one of the most impactful books I've ever come across, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. I found this book at exactly the right time in my life, and it has given me a fresh perspective on what's most important in my life. And it has given me empathy for myself because I now know, thanks to Oliver, that I'm never going to get all of the things done. There just isn't time. There isn't some place in the future that I'll reach in which I can sit down, relax, and know that everything is done. So I might as well concentrate on what's most important and let the other stuff go. And you might as well do the same. After reading Oliver's work, of course. Oliver also writes an email newsletter called The Imperfectionist that he sends out twice a month. I find Oliver's writing incredibly readable and yet incredibly deep and philosophical. And I urge everyone to read his stuff, but not before you listen to this conversation, of course. And lastly, Oliver also has a new book out called Meditations for Mortals, 4 weeks to embrace your limitations and make time for what counts. But now, please welcome Oliver Burkeman. I have your book here. Now, what I wanted to start with was, I was listening to you speak with Chris Williamson recently on the Modern Wisdom podcast. And so you're talking about the difference between reading for pleasure and reading for the productive benefits of reading. In that you're constantly thinking, oh, I need to remember that, or I need to note down this quote. And I thought I'd just share my copy of your book just to show, can you see that? That's all folded down pages, and every book you see behind me has the exact same thing, because I have this vision in my life that in the future I'll be able to go through all of these and go through to all the ones that I folded down to remember all these quotes and to take them in and to make use of them, which of course I never will. I just found that very, very interesting.
Well, let's dispel that illusion today.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, please. So what I thought we'd start with is your kind of early career. What led you to being a journalist in general? What was the lead up to that?
At least on the surface sense, we can talk more sort of psychologically, but in terms of, like, I was extremely sort of one track. I sort of always wanted to do this to be some kind of journalist from a very young age. I think I was foisting sort of photocopied newsletters on my junior school, top end of primary school classmates. I think there was always a copy of The Guardian on our breakfast table growing up, and I'm sure that on some level I invested that with the sort of the authority of for people who know what's what in the world, sort of the source of truth coming through the letterbox every morning. So sort of wanting to do that was just as far back as I can and remember, and it's not like a family profession or anything, so it's kind of strange, but it turned out to be a very good wrapper for other things, right? Because I think one of the great things about anything journalistic is that you can sort of you can specialize as a journalist. Obviously, many people do, but you can also kind of resist the pressure to specialize in a way that's probably harder in other careers.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, when I wanted to be a journalist when I was maybe 13, and I remember going to a careers evening at my school, and there was a journalist there, and his one piece of advice was, don't study journalism, specialize in something else that you're going to write about. And of course I ignored him and studied journalism anyway.
I think sorry, go on.
No, all I was going to say was I think he was wrong in my case anyway. I think it was incredibly useful to learn about pieces to camera, documentary making, all these different parts of journalism all in one course. I found very valuable, but I suppose he wasn't maybe expecting me to go into like podcasting, or he was maybe talking about I don't know, column writing or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I know that line that sort of says you should go and live in the world before you then start to sort of comment on the world. But I think fair enough, perhaps that's in sort of hard news journalism, maybe, and certain other specific sectors. But for me, as for lots of people, it's not a unique situation at all. Figuring out what's going on in the world and writing about it and trying to characterize it in language has always just been one process. And as you know, there's a big emphasis now in the world of sort of, the creator economy and podcasts and everything else of like teaching what you learn the moment you learn it, which in general, although I'm sure it leads to a little bit of, sort of charlatanism here or there, it seems to be like it's much truer to the human experience, right? That we sort of try to understand things and communicate about them all in one go, not in a sort of separate stages of life.
Yeah, I find that interesting. And the other thing that I was just curious about then is what led you to writing about productivity? Was there, have you looked back on your life to realize why you're the type of person that wanted to be as productive as possible?
Well, there's sort of two layers to that. I mean, I think on some level, a preoccupation with productivity is very often a manifestation of anxiety. It's that famous quote from, that I use in my most recent book, and I'm forgetting the source, Alec Wilkinson, that most successful people are just a walking anxiety disorder harnessed for productivity. And I do have a whole bunch of thoughts about why I might have been, and still am to some extent, on the anxious side of the continuum. Why that manifests in productivity as opposed to all the other ways that feeling anxiety about life can manifest is another question, and I don't know what the reason for that is. All I do know is that certainly the world of sort of productivity advice and productivity writing does seem to offer the possibility that you could sort of get on top of things and feel secure and achieve the control that anxiety is all about not having, etc., following some pretty simple practices, and practices that you could sort of put in place tomorrow if you bought the right notebooks and pens, as opposed to, religious and spiritual paths here, or just, good long-term psychotherapy, which is a great thing. But at the time that I was sort of getting involved in productivity, it was like, oh, maybe this can all be fixed with a few. So I don't know why it manifested in that way, but I'm pretty sure that a real fixation on productivity is usually some kind of anxiety.
Yeah, to me it seems like it's an illusion of control. It's making it seem like you are in control of the situation, and almost a distraction from the anxiety itself. Instead of looking deep into the difficult areas of your psyche, it's easier to think this way of writing a to-do list will solve my problems, or this new health practice, this meditation or something like that will help me. And it's true. I think for me anyway, it's just if something is explained by an authority figure, a scientist or something like that, as something that's healthy and something that's good for you, I'm going to do it regardless if I enjoy it or not. I'm going to do it and think this is, and I'll think the whole time while I'm doing it, this is good for me. This is healthy. And I think that's what it is. It's this sort of control. It's trying to control negative emotion with external what would you call it, from external sources rather than looking internally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it feeds that sense that like you're engaged in the process of fixing it, and it's not going to be necessarily very long now before it's fixed. So I think it's very interesting that, you know, if one thinks about one's own interactions with books about building habits, or books about, or sort of, I don't know, online courses about getting organized, fill in the blanks, or other people who are sort of, when people are sort of very excited by those things, it's always at the sort of beginning stages of the process, right? It's not, it's quite rare. It does happen, but it's quite rare to find people saying like, I've done this, like I've followed these paths towards inculcating habits, and it's all done now, and I can put those books and ideas away because it's just a new part of my life. People do make that claim in YouTube videos, obviously, but I just mean that, you know, it's always that sense of being just on the cusp of figuring it all out, which is very alluring. One of the great benefits of writing that column that I wrote for The Guardian for God knows how long was that I sort of got to test out so many of these schemes and systems and philosophies that I finally began to wonder if the magic bullet didn't actually exist. Whereas if you don't get to test that many of them out, you could keep on believing that the magic bullet was just one more sort of airport book away from where you were.
Well, it makes it. I must say that I found your book at that critical point in my life where I was starting to realize, oh, I'm taking on far too much. Basically, since January, the start of this year, that's when I started the podcast. I started implementing these rules in my head that I had to follow no matter what if I was ever to be like successful or to grow or to be fulfilled. And so the first rule was I have to record an episode of the podcast every Sunday and never miss a week. That was the first rule. Then I said I have to post on social media, all the social media apps throughout the week, every week. And then it's basically like building the expectations up, and then when they become normal, building them again. And it just got to a point where I was posting every single day on every social media app, then twice on YouTube, and just rushing to do all of this because I also work part-time in retail, and then trying to record this podcast, and then also posting on social media. I was rushing every morning before work just to fit all of this in. And it wasn't until it was September that just passed that I decided I'm going to just take a break from everything. No podcast, no social media, and that's when I was basically reading your book throughout that whole month, and I found it, just very helpful because it makes you contemplate what's most meaningful and whittle down all the unnecessary things that you're just doing because they're rules, or just doing because you think they're healthy, regardless of your own enjoyment or your own happiness.
Yeah, no, I think we're one of the things that's going on there, at least for me, is that it's there's a real, it's quite a religious thought. I don't know, you're a philosopher, so you can tell me what you make of this, but it's quite a religious thought that there's some sort of rule out there that is basically could be our salvation, and that if you follow it, your side of the deal is that you'll follow it completely, well, religiously, very, very diligently, and the payoff is that it will sort of live life on your behalf almost. Success is guaranteed so long as you do this thing diligently. And I think that ultimately that is, just to get deep about it, I think ultimately that is a sort of a perfectly understandable and very widespread desire to avoid a fuller engagement with the sort of conscious feeling of being alive and limited in what we can do and how much time we have and how much control we have. It really is the thought that, just with one final push, you might get there. What makes it so obvious that that doesn't work, and just from your own account of it, is like there's no stopping. There's no reason to believe that at some point it'll feel like you're doing enough social media posting or including enough platform, because then why not do, a podcast twice a week and, on and on and on and on and on. There's no sort of reasonable place to say that you've reached a sort of sufficient level of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're talking about religion there. There's almost a metaphorical idea there that if you work incredibly hard, you may find God at the end of that path. Whereas there's some philosophers and there's some theologians who almost believe that God is actually found inside of yourself. It's found in the internal, and that would make sense because it's a hell of a lot harder to look within than to work hard externally. So if I just go to the gym or if I help all of these people and just work myself tirelessly, that's all external and it's avoiding anything to do with my own inadequacies or how I feel about myself or anything from my past. And that seems to be where the fulfillment really is looking internally.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really good, whatever it is, analogy, metaphor. And it sort of sits against another kind of religious dichotomy, certainly within Christianity, right? Which is the distinction between that sort of Calvinist, if I'm right about that, idea of justification by works, the idea that if you work hard enough, you're either going to get to heaven or prove that you're already on course for heaven, versus the idea of grace, the idea that that you're already adequate and you already have a right to exist on the planet regardless of your productivity. And it's fascinating how these ideas play out in sort of self-help genre that are kind of on some level some of the oldest theological debates going as well.
Why do you think it's so uncomfortable for so many people to accept that this is enough? Because for me, it was I seem to be addicted to this constant looking to the future and working extremely hard, and then when I eventually had to stop because I had to rest or sleep, it was almost like unbearable just to sit in the present, like just to sit there. And it's almost like saying, instead of looking to the future where nothing that's imagined, it's harder just to feel reality in the present.
I mean, my sort of explanation for why this should be is my general kind of custom version of, I don't know, psychoanalysis plus Heidegger plus a bit of ancient philosophy. I think that it's about not wanting to accept that we're mortal. It's about the sort of deep difficulty that we have as kind of, finite material animals with a mind capable of conceiving of much more than that. In some sense, a mind capable of conceiving of the infinite in a very finite body, and it's just dealing with that mismatch. The more that you can feel that you're getting towards the state of kind of omnipotence or sort of, being able to do everything and being fully optimized, the more you can sort of feel yourself to be avoiding the actual fate that we face as humans. So there's a lovely quote which I use in 4,000 Weeks, but have also repeated enough times now that I've got it practically from memory, from John Maynard Keynes, about how the purposive man, as he puts it, aka the productivity geek, is is always trying to secure for his actions a spurious and elusive immortality by pushing his interest in them further into the future. And that's that bit about he doesn't love his cat, but only the cat's kittens, nor in truth the kittens, but only the kitten's kittens, and so on forward forever to the end of catdom. Anyway, I think that's a really perceptive understanding that, as long as you're on track to do more, as long as the moment of truth is coming later, as long as you're working towards a situation where you can finally do everything that you want to do, by this kind of crazy reverse logic, that the fact that we need more time to put that into practice makes us feel like we're going to get more time to put it into practice. So I think it, yeah, and I know you point out very sort of vividly that sense of how difficult it is to just sit and do nothing. It's not painful in a sort of how we normally think about physical pain. It's in fact incredibly easy to do it if there's some reason that you have to, but we'll do almost anything to avoid it, which is kind of fascinating to me. And I guess, if it's as existential as I've just made out, then that would explain why it feels so unpleasant.
I think I found that was another revelation I had in that month of September that I took off, is I was more able to pay attention to my own mind, how my mind actually thought, rather in the present moment, rather than thinking about the future. And I found myself, we'd be going out with family, my partner and I would be going out with family, and we'd be sitting in a restaurant, and I could feel like a physical reaction, as if I was getting like itchy, like I wasn't doing enough. I was just sitting there. Or I would be telling myself, "Oh, remember, this is productive as well. This is good. Like, this is good to spend time with family. This is good and healthy for you." And it reminded me of a story you were telling about. You were walking early in the morning near your house, and there was snow covered all over the land in front of you, and you had your coffee, and you thought to yourself, it was something like, I need to feel this more, or
yeah, or sort of take ownership of this experience, or guarantee that I get lots more of them in the future. Yeah, I was just using that to explain the strangeness of like how even when we do get what we want, just sort of enjoying it in the moment is incredibly difficult. And I've been there. I know what you're talking about, right? You try to justify things that feel like an interruption from productivity. You find a way to sort of justify them as somehow helping in the long run, or something like that. And to just enjoy them in the moment, because you only get a bunch of moments in life, is much more difficult. I think that's true, and I still struggle with it. I think that what I'm getting better at is not setting up the kinds of systems and personal rules that make that problem worse than it naturally is for humans anyway, So I was always kind of launching these very ambitious systems of goals and scheduling and all the rest of it, and finding sort of twin problems. Firstly, that actually it kind of doesn't have life in it. After a few days, those kinds of systems of schedules and lists just make you feel very like you're just following a set of instructions and living by rote. But also that it makes the rest of life outside of work feel more like an obstacle to work. It makes that time feel kind of second rate and second tier. I mean, I don't know how common this is, but for me, I still deal with this to some extent, right? Because we have a 7-year-old son, and I genuinely love hanging out with him. And about 90% of the time, it's just a pleasure what we're doing. Obviously, there are things you have to do, and chores and stuff with kids, and moods that kids get into that are not intrinsically a pleasure. But a vast amount of the time, he's very laid back. He's very interested and funny and intelligent, and he's my son, so it's just a delight. But it's been quite a process to get better at not sort of degrading that time in my mind because it isn't productive for work. Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing how difficult that is, because it's not like it's not like the activity that I'm doing instead of work is on any level. It's fun. It's in keeping with my values. Like nothing is wrong about it, except that it doesn't have so much of a productive future focus. Of course, another kind of parent turns parenting into a relentless quest to create a perfect adult, and that's got its own problems and probably worse problems in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, my strategy for um, not letting personal relationships get in the way of my productivity was right before we planned to go out for, say, a lunch or a dinner or anything like that, I would cram everything I would do on that day into the 2 hours beforehand.
So and I would always do it just then it didn't matter. Right. Then it didn't matter that you were,
exactly.
Right.
And then I felt great when we
Right. Then it didn't matter that you were wasting your life on such things as intimate human relationships, right?
Yes, yeah.
Because you'd already ticked off the item.
Myself.
I'm teasing you because this I'm not sure that was a specific strategy that I used, but I'm teasing you because I completely relate. Yeah.
Yeah, what I found surprising just reading your book was just that anybody else at all has anything similar to this, because for 2 decades I had it in my head. I've never met anyone else that is like this. And I almost felt like it was a champagne problem, that I was being too productive and felt like that was an issue, because everyone else I ever came into contact with almost had the opposite problem, that they struggled to be productive in any sense. So I almost felt like I was just complaining over something that's perceived as good.
Well, yeah, no, I think that's true, right? To the extent that what we're talking about here is a kind of perfectionism, I think broadly understood that label applies. It's not the only. Sometimes it has a more narrow connotation, but it is that kind of problem that is so societally sort of celebrated that it's hard to think of it as a problem. I always think it's fascinating that we use the word driven as a compliment, when sort of what that actually suggests is sort of a kind of enslavement or being treated like cattle or something, right? You know, it's not a good thing to be driven in other contexts, but it's something we celebrate. Whereas if your interest was not in doing as much as possible, but consuming as much alcohol as possible, you know, there'd be a chance that people in your social circles might intervene. Whereas they don't do that when you're just being very productive. It's interesting what you say. Sorry, interrupt if I'm going off what you want to talk about, but the thing you say about not realizing that other people think like this is a very common. I mean, I don't want to make it sound totally common, but you know, this is quite a frequent reaction I get both to the book and to my newsletter. This sort of sense of like, oh, I didn't realize people were like, are you inside my brain, and that kind of thing. And I have yet to fully understand, you know, because I haven't done any sort of quantitative research about it, whether that's because this is just sort of ubiquitous in the world and people are sort of hiding it or not articulating it properly. Or, you know, frankly, it's just the way sort of publishing and digital media works. I'm going to connect to my tribe almost inevitably, even if that group of people is not very representative. But yeah, there are plenty of us about. I can say that much.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something comforting about that. What I did want to speak about is this imagined place that we have in our heads, that if we just get enough done, we'll be able to just relax and live the life we want. And yeah, that I relate to that so much, because I unconsciously I'd been saying to myself for years, just grind it out now, then when you quote unquote make it, then you can do all the things you want to do. And I was telling this to a friend, and the friend said, well, what is it you want to do now? And I said, well, I'd like to just have the life where I could wake up when I want to wake up, and then maybe go for a coffee round the corner at a cafe and maybe just read or just sit. And she said, like, why can't you do that now? And it's so true. Like, you can do it now. Like, I can. There's a cafe around the corner. I could easily do that. But you tell yourself that there's some destination to get to beforehand. Like, you have to punish yourself or to earn that sort of that bliss.
Yeah, I think that's it's very well put. I think there's lots of sort of psychological and as well as sort of social and economic reasons why we fall into that mindset. And also I think there's just there's a hidden payoff to it, right? That's what Bruce Tift writes so well about in his book Already Free. He's a psychotherapist with a sort of Buddhist inclinations, that as long as you still have to fix this problem of not yet being on top of things, or of not yet having figured out how to be able to meet every demand without any stress or whatever, as long as there's still that thing to fix, you don't have to quite fully show up for life now. You don't have to accept things about you that you find difficult to accept, or things about other people that you find difficult to accept. And so this line at the beginning of my new book that just came out. I've got a quote at the front from the Jungian Marion Woodman, who says, it's easier to try to be better than you are than to be who you are, which I think really sums that up. There's something quite difficult about for a certain kind of us, any person anyway, about getting off that progression to the imagined sunlit uplands of having sorted it all out.
Yeah, I think that quote kind of sums up. A few months ago, one of the big epiphanies I had was that, like, I'm okay now. Like, there's no. It reminds me of your idea of productivity debt, where it's you're starting from -100 and have to claw your way back up to 0, and everyone else is starting at 0, and it's just thinking that you're automatically behind. And like, I do this even. I did this recently, actually. For a few months I'd been telling myself I want to get a pair of shoes. Don't know if you're aware of these shoes. They're called barefoot shoes, and basically they're wider and they've.
No, go ahead. Not the ones that fit around each of your toes. I'm aware of.
No, so they were the first ever. They were the first ever barefoot shoes, and now a bunch of companies have made ones that just look like trainers for all intents and purposes. They have a flat sole, and it's basically, the idea is that as humans, we were supposed to be barefoot, so it's better for your feet, and you can build your muscles in your feet and your legs. And so for months, when I became aware of these shoes, I was telling myself, oh, I'm not healthy enough until I get these shoes. My feet are weak until I get these shoes. And it's that whole idea. Instead of thinking my feet will be stronger, I'm now more thinking my feet are weak now. And this all came to a head basically when I eventually bought the pair of shoes, put them on a few days ago, and looked at them and thought, oh, they look ridiculous. Okay, I'll put them back. And it just wasn't worth it. But it's just, that whole build-up was for nothing, because I put them on and thought, no, I don't want these.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, this sort of how comfortable it is, in a sort of a negative way, to deem yourself inadequate in the present and not really an authority in your own life, in a way. I think it probably, for whatever combination of reasons, I think it definitely is something that sort of comes naturally to people who are pretty good, kind of people who always handed their homework in on time at school and probably got pretty good grades in their homework. And it's very easy to establish that sense that your basic sort of sense of adequacy is connected to your output in that way, or to the effort that you put in, or to having the right shoes. It's sort of very, it's much stranger and more discombobulating to sort of think that you might already be at 0 in the productivity debt stakes, rather than trying to work your way back up to it. So there is that kind of, there is that comfort in thinking not there yet, but I will be soon as long as I put in all the effort. It's just comfort that's combined with a sort of permanent postponing of your enjoyment of life.
Yeah, it's that the way my therapist had put it is being grateful for getting to 97 in a day, 97%, rather than berating yourself for the missing 3%, for not getting to 100. And it's like any rational person would be proud of getting to, say, 90% or to being really productive, but it's that 3% gets you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's yeah, totally. Plus, of course, I think that sort of image or way of talking about it almost understates the problem, because it suggests that if you pushed a little bit more, you get to 100. But in this sort of stuff, you never get to 100, because 100 would be perfect work. 100 would be not only every single email in my inbox answered, but all emails forever into the future answered as well, right? And it's just it's not available as a thing. Yeah.
What was there a moment in your career where you realized that you were obsessed with productivity, like too much, that you needed to make a change? Is there something you can look back on and think there's the moment, or a pivotal time?
Well, I do write in 4,000 Weeks about this one epiphany that I had on a park bench in Brooklyn, where I sort of heading to work on a normal anxious week and more deadlines than usual and more anxious than usual, and trying to figure out how I could use all sorts of productivity techniques and postponing of social events and everything to get through it all, and being struck by the idea of like, oh, this is impossible. Oh, this is impossible. All right. And considering that to be a very sort of liberating insight. But that was like an intellectual epiphany, and I'm really good at figuring out ideas about what life is like, and much worse at sort of living into that different way of being. So I feel like I'm still very much a work in progress in the latter. I don't know. Yeah. So these things sort of, they come at me in these little moments when I sort of see the problem conceptually. And then, of course, it's like years later and I'm still sort of doing the thing. And even now, to some extent, right? It's just a very gradual process of what I hope is growth. And, you know, it's not even that I'm not obsessed now with trying to get on top of stuff. It's a subtle thing. Like just a couple of weeks ago, I went back to this email software tellingly called Superhuman. I don't know if you're aware of this app. It is actually in many ways a really good and fast email experience, but the promise that it will make you superhuman is kind of a little bit too near the knuckle in a way. But anyway, you know, and some part of me is still excited to download that and to think like maybe this is the thing that that finally makes everything go sort of seamlessly and smoothly. I think the difference is I kind of don't believe myself anymore. So it's more like, you know, this will be fun to try. Maybe it'll be a slight improvement. I'll be interested to see if it lives up to its promises, as opposed to, and not surprised if in a couple of weeks' time I find myself just as submerged by email as before, as opposed to like, yeah, this is the thing, this is it now. I'm weeks away and one more shot of self-discipline away from finally reaching the plateau of effortless optimization. I don't believe that anymore, even when I sometimes kind of you know, pursue it almost as a hobby or something, you know, in a sort of more playful spirit.
Yeah, I wonder if you feel like you've encountered this issue. One thing I've been trying to wrap my head around the last few months is differentiating between something I enjoy and something I should enjoy, or something I should do. And like the example I have is TV. I would fill my watch list with things that I should watch because I think I should know about this thing. It could be a documentary, it could be something about the news. And I'd been doing that for so long that what I'm trying to figure out now is, what do I enjoy? What do I actually want to do? And what do I want to do?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a tricky thing if you live your life for so long.
Yeah, no, and it's really subtle because obviously there are certain, maybe there's a documentary about current affairs which you think to yourself, look, I know I don't want to watch this, but I think I should. That's a little easier to see, and maybe you will decide to do it anyway, right? But then there's the kind of category of, as you say, of you want, and that can include lots of activities that are, for other people just genuinely very, very pleasurable and enjoyable. And then you enter this sort of subtle zone where it's like, well, in what context should you just be honest and say, look, I don't enjoy that kind of like epic TV drama. So the fact that everyone says you've got to watch this series is just irrelevant to me. I'm going to go and, read poetry or something. Versus that, obviously, that question is like, why don't I like sitting and watching that drama? Is that because I feel like I'm not being useful enough? Is that because I feel like it's sort of too indulgent? So, and I find that, I don't think there's any clear answer to that dilemma. It's just that actually connecting to sort of deep enjoyment and deep fun is not a simple process. It's it's quite, you have to sort of experiment and be willing to pursue things and then back away from them, because you can't really tell until you're in it whether that is a want or a want-to-want or just a straightforward old-fashioned should. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like part of it as well is if I've been told a bunch of times, or if I know that a TV show is being watched by a lot of people, I think, oh, I'm missing out then, so I need to watch that, even if it's not something I would watch otherwise if I had the choice myself. And that kind of brings me on to,
I was going to say, there's also the reverse of that, which I suffer from, which is if enough people are going on about something, I sort of refuse to watch it, and probably thereby miss out on absolutely brilliant stuff because I'm just annoyed at how many people are talking about it. Anyway, carry on. Sorry.
Well, that actually reminds me of I can't remember who said it. It was definitely a tattoo artist that said it, and it was maybe in a TV show, and it was just because he was talking about why everyone got panthers at one point, or tribal art or something like that. And I think it was the panther. And it's for like decades, that's always been a popular tattoo, is a panther. And he said, yeah, there's a reason everyone gets it. It's because it's a good tattoo, or it means something, or something like that. So I think some people could be in danger, and I definitely fall into this category. You're in danger of not watching something, not paying attention to something that everyone else is paying attention to, because you think, well, they must all be wrong because because it's popular. But in reality, it's probably popular for a reason. It's very good, The other thing that I was going to say about just the relation to other people is, what I kept finding myself doing when I'm in this sort of unconscious, I don't know, the way I put it, and I think someone else had put it this way as well, is being dragged rather than driven. So when I'm being like unconsciously dragged, like I'm constantly rushing about because I need to get the next thing done, or I need to cram all this stuff in my day. So I could be out in public and I'll be literally rushing. I'll be speed walking, almost running to get home so I can do this next thing. And if someone just walks in front of me slowly, in my head it's like, oh God, like you not got somewhere to be. God, speed up. And it was one of my previous guests said the same thing about, like, if you're driving and someone's going slowly, it's like maybe they're driving slowly because they're enjoying the drive and they're actually in the present moment, and maybe the reason you're angry about it is because you yearn to be like that as well.
Yeah it's I think there's lots to that. Yeah, it's fascinating.
What I like to do kind of towards the end of the episode is go through some kind of quick fire questions that are actually subtly deep. So one actually came, so they're not quick fire at all. Actually, they're quick for me to say, but the answer probably isn't. very quick. But the first one actually came from James Lipton, who presented the Actors Studio, and he said, "What would you want God to say when you get to the pearly gates, if they exist?"
Oh right, yeah. This is this. It's like the Proust questionnaire or whatever it's called, isn't it? It's like these questions that kind of seem so unassuming, and actually, goodness me. Um. Wow. Um. What would you want him to say? My mind goes immediately to sort of what would you want people to have remembered you for or something, right? But that's not necessarily what God is involved in saying at the pearly gates. I'd just like to feel welcomed, I think. I'd hope for a wisecrack or two. Um, yeah, I am so completely convinced that whatever God means and heaven means, it doesn't involve somebody saying something to you at a gate, that it's very hard for me to answer that question beyond that. I would, if it is a question about one's sort of how one lived one's life, I would like to feel that I had shown up for it and for people in it as fully as I was ever capable of doing. I think that's the basic navigating principle. But yeah, okay. I'm just going to let that question peter out and hope that you'll go on to the next one.
What's been your biggest epiphany in life so far?
I feel like I've had a lot of epiphanies. But as I was saying before, it doesn't necessarily lead to some kind of instant life transformation when they happen. I think certainly one of the bigger ones is the has to have been, some time ago now, but the realization that what am I trying to say? Wow, this is really not a quick fire answer. I think the realization that there is sort of the deepest pleasures are just in sort of being with certain other people, and that other people actually think that about me. That was by far the more brain exploding aspect of it. And just the really sort of obvious cliched truth, but it wasn't to me, that that relationship is sort of where sort of everything happens, which is not to say that writing and sitting on your own at a desk isn't a fundamental part of my life, but that what I'm doing there is actually being in the kind of relationship with other people in a way that I didn't previously realize. So anyway, big cliche, but I had to go through an epiphany to realize it.
Well, it's like the tattoo. Like, there's a reason it is a big cliche, because it's
absolutely, yeah.
True.
A minor epiphany is sort of cliches are true for a reason, and if some kind of self-help dictum or book or something makes me really cringe with embarrassment, then that's probably because I really need the advice contained therein. So it's all part of the same thing, right? Not to would I rather be when it comes to sort of life wisdom, would I rather be completely unique and special, or would I rather be right?
Yeah. I mean, that when you're talking about relationships there, that some of the most emotional things other people have said to me, where I have a more emotional response, is along the lines of, we love you as you are, not because of what you do. And it's just that always unconsciously hits me when there's some sort of, someone says something like that, and especially if it's someone that doesn't know me particularly well, because I could just chalk, like, if my partner said that or my parents said that, you just kind of chalk off, well, they have to say that. But if someone externally says that, that's not in your kind of inner circle, it does hit you emotionally, and it's just something you never think of yourself. Like, and it's annoying that you don't think of yourself.
I believe that's what the Christians mean by when they talk about grace as well, right? This sense that you're accepted regardless of whether you're acceptable or not, or what you do or what you don't do. Yeah, on that topic of people in your outside your circle saying, I remember, you're making me realize now that I got an email fairly soon after 4,000 Weeks first came out. I've had tons of incredibly lovely messages from people, even though that's going to sound like bragging. It's the truth. And a lot of people say, by means of encouragement, like, keep writing, this is good, you're providing good value or whatever, And I remember one woman writing to me saying, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially like, this is really great, and if you never wrote another word, you'd have made a useful contribution to this topic, or that, you don't, that very thought that like maybe there was value in this, in what I'd already done, or just in what I was expressing, rather than that subtle sense of like, provided you carry on doing it for many years. So that's a sort of, it's not quite the same point, but it's related. That idea that actually, you don't have to get somewhere else. I still get this a bit today when, I sometimes do some speaking in certain contexts where I'm paid to give the speech, and my immediate thought is like, okay, I've got to make sure I give really good value for money. And somebody in my circle said, like, do you realize they're asking you to do this because they want to hear like what you've already figured out and what you've already thought about, not because you now have to like do a whole new project of working something else out. That whole idea is like still very powerful to me.
Yeah, and what you're saying about the positive comments you've had, when I occasionally will get a positive comment from someone online, they kind of stop me in my tracks, remind me of why I'm doing this. I think there's part of me that I'm almost, I think that rule I had to post every Sunday, I told myself I need to do that for 3 years. I need to post every single Sunday, never miss a Sunday, and do that for 3 years. Then something will happen. And it was almost to prove a point of, this is how hard you have to work for a podcast to take off. And it was almost this thing at the end after the 3 years. And it was when anytime someone comments saying, "Oh, that was really meaningful to me," or something along those lines, it stops me in the tracks. I'm like, that's why I'm doing it. It's not anything else. It's how it makes other people feel.
Yeah. Sometimes people respond about my newsletter that they like the fact that it isn't more regular, and they like the fact that it's surprising when it's going to arrive, which is another way of saying that my failure to keep to the consistent schedule that I do have, but just don't follow, could actually be of benefit to people. It's amazing. Yeah, no, I think, and you're right about what you say. That's the point of doing it, the actual connections and the resonance.
Well, what I found out as well, when I have that rule of I have to post every Sunday, because I send out a weekly email newsletter as well, by the same name, send that out every Sunday and post a podcast every Sunday, the content diminishes. If I tell myself I have to post every week, regardless of what I'm doing in that week, I will rush to get something in. So I will rush writing a short article, and it'll end up being maybe a couple paragraphs of twaddle, basically, because I'm just trying to rush something, get something out there.
And it's subtle, so because of course if you take if you go the other extreme and be like, I'm only going to put something out when it's really, really good, that's obviously poison as well. So it's that sort of regular-ish kind of feeling that is important, I think. Yeah.
What I'll finish on is, when do you feel the most free?
When do I feel the most free? I certainly feel very free in the kind of big natural landscapes that we are surrounded by here in the North York Moors now. But I think it's also in kind of social settings with specific friends where I feel like, they just wouldn't bat an eyelid if my career took a downturn, or if I, that's the most obvious example of that, or if my finances were in the gutter or something, it's like it just would just be irrelevant. I don't know how far one could go. Whether I assume that there's a kind of friendship where you could probably commit murder and still have friendship, but I don't intend to test that. But yeah, I think I feel freest in the context where I do feel most accepted as myself, regardless of what I'm accomplishing or not.
Amazing. So one more question is just where can people find you? Where can people buy your book and subscribe to the newsletter, etc.?
The books are available wherever you get your books, including audiobooks, and that's certainly the sort of best way to support my work if you want to do that. And then oliverburkeman.com is the website where you can sign up for the newsletter and find out about all this stuff. Yeah.
Amazing. So I'll link that link below. But Oliver, thank you so much for taking the time. I say this at the end of every podcast. I'm always amazed at. I'm not amazed at about 95% of the emails I send out don't get a response, and then another 2 maybe will get a response saying people don't have enough time. I'm always amazed at the remaining. I've forgotten what I've said percentage-wise. The remaining percentage actually say yes and take time.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and it's good to spend time talking with people who are screwed up in a similar way to myself.
Indeed.
Just a few more things before you take off. Firstly, thank you for watching. It genuinely means a lot to see people viewing and liking the content. Second, if you're enjoying the content, please subscribe and share. Those are the best ways you can support the podcast. As you can probably tell, I don't have a ton of fancy equipment. I don't have a team behind me helping with marketing or editing the podcast. I don't have much resources. So any help is greatly appreciated. You can also stay up to date with everything I'm doing on social media. All of the links will be in the show notes. And you can also listen to the Struggle podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And lastly, keep on struggling.